Okay, so I think we gave everyone some time to enter. So let's kickstart. Good afternoon, everyone, and also good morning or good evening to those joining us from other time zones. Welcome to the online launch of the Compliance Checker. My name is Rita, and I'm part of the team at AidEnvironment. It is great to have you all here today. And to see the interest that this launch has generated across geographies and sectors. So before we actually get started, a few quick practicalities from our side. So the session is being recorded, as you already probably know, and it will be shared with all registrants after the event. We will have a small Q&A session at the end, and your participation is, of course, very welcome. If questions come to mind during this webinar, during the presentations, please submit them through the Q&A function in Zoom, which you will find in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. If it's not immediately visible, please click on the three dots at the bottom right in that same toolbar, which will open a menu with some additional options, and the Q&A function should also be there. We will be monitoring that throughout the webinar, and we'll do our best to also address as many questions and comments as possible. Also, if you run into any technical difficulties during the session, please also use the Q&A to let us know about that, and we'll do also our best to assist you. Regarding the program for the next hour and for this webinar, we'll begin with Lisanna, our General Director at AidEnvironment. She will introduce the organization and set the context for today's launch. Lisanna will also be our moderator today, and she will be sharing the floor with our speakers. First, Sarah Drost, Senior Researcher at AidEnvironment, who will walk us through the work that underpins the Compliance Checker. And this will be followed by a live demo of the platform. And after Sarah, we'll hear from Sam Lawson, founder and director of Earthsight. He'll be sharing his perspective on why tools like the Compliance Checker matter, especially in the current regulatory landscape. We will then open the floor for the Q&A, so please keep those questions coming throughout. And with that, I'll hand over to Lisanna. Lisanna, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rita, and thank you all very much for being here. Good day. Thank you for taking the time to join us today for the launch of the Compliance Checker tool. I think the high interest in the launch is already a sign of how many like-minded people we have here, and also of the importance of this type of work and of how the Compliance Checker comes at the right time. Next slide, please. So for us, most of you, I think, know us quite well already. But for those who do not, let me introduce quickly the organization behind the Compliance Checker. That is AidEnvironment. AidEnvironment is a not-for-profit sustainability research and implementation organization. As AidEnvironment, we strive and we work towards a sustainable world. We work at the intersection of sustainability, responsible business, and environmental and social impact. For over 35 years, we have supported companies, governments, financial institutions, and civil society organizations, as well as communities and smallholder producers in addressing some of the world's most pressing sustainability challenges. So from deforestation to climate change, human rights, and other responsible supply chain issues. So how do we do that? So how do we work towards sustainable production? We do so in two different manners, I would say, two different ways of working. On the one hand, AidEnvironment has a strong presence on the ground. We work on the-ground implementation of solutions. That means, for example, water management, catchment-based approaches. We facilitate the shift towards regenerative agriculture, towards diversified agroforestry systems, reforestation. We do so to improve the livelihoods of communities by improving food security and living income, for example. That's one very practical angle that we take. And the other way of working, line of work that we have is the research and intelligence type of work. So for that, we do a lot of remote assessments, oftentimes combined with underground verification. We do so through GIS and policy assessments, and we're monitoring risks like deforestation and other environmental challenges. For us, what we think is that those very different types of approaches, if we combine them, that really allows us to see the full picture, have an integrated systems level perspective that we need. And next slide, please. And as you notice, a key part of our work is helping organizations to move from commitments to actual implementation. So over the years, we have seen that there are many organizations, governments, NGOs, companies, authorities, others that have high interest in compliance, especially with evolving regulations and sustainability requirements. But oftentimes these organizations struggle with the complexity, with the changing expectations, and also they face the practical challenge of translating rules into action. And that's where our work and specifically the compliance checker comes in and why it's important to be here for the compliance checker launch. The compliance checker has been developed to help organizations navigate these increasingly complex landscape in a more efficient, transparent, but also practical way. So the compliance checker and its development, it builds onto over a decade of work and of impact and of research that has already happened. Our accomplishments and that impact have not happened in isolation. It has been a result of years of close partnerships, of research and development. And specifically for the compliance checker, we would like to acknowledge the many organizations that have contributed to it. And specifically, we would like to thank the organizations that funded the compliance checker. And those include NORAD, NICFI, the European Climate Foundation, DGD Belgium, and Coffee Watch. Thank you very much for supporting us and for your trust. With that small thanks, I think it is an honor to hand over to one of the key people behind the compliance checker, which is my colleague Sarah Drost. She will take you through the compliance checker into more detail, what it entails and how it can be used. Sarah, please, the floor is yours.
Yes. Can you see my screen?
Yes, all good.
Okay. So hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. And as Lisanne already highlighted, we are indeed not starting from scratch. So the compliance checker tool is basically an accumulation and integration of years of activities under our deforestation-free supply chains work. And we have collaborated with many organizations that are also now here in this event. With you, we have mapped supply chains and commodity flows from the level of farms till international supply chains, sometimes even till the level of shelves in European stores. Since a couple of years, we have started flagging deforestation risk for EU member states and linked to their commodity imports. We have been developing for years corporate risk profiles of commodity companies. And together with Profundo, we have translated sustainability risk into financial risk under our 10 years chain reaction research program. But foremost, I believe we are best known for our monitoring capacity. So we monitor social and environmental impacts linked to commodity production. And also we are known for the development of exemplary case studies. So basically, this compliance checker is an aggregating tool of all this case study evidence that we have been collecting over years in collaboration also with local partners, for instance, in Brazil and Indonesia. So before I start the demo, I want to highlight two key characteristics of the compliance checker. First of all, it's open access because we want to make sure that the actionable information is available for all relevant audiences. And secondly, that we focused on integrating hard evidence data. So it's not based on modeling, but we really check real-time deforestation, deforestation fires. We check if there's environmental license. If available, we use transaction invoices to show buyer-supplier relationship. So it's really hard evidence. And we do this because our key audience is also legal organizations, campaigners, and we want to enable that they can use the cases for the development of legal cases or to submit substantiated concerns. Also for journalists, media, we create cases so they can create awareness and flag non-compliance cases in media articles. For competent authorities, both in Europe, but as well in producer countries, we hope they can use the tool as an aggregated tool for evidence of potential non-compliance. And for companies, we hope that with the cases that also potentially link to their companies, that they improve their due diligence systems. So I will now start a very brief demo of the website. And of course, I'm going to start with the case studies, because as I said, that's the key or the core from the Compliance Checker platform. So you will see here my screen on case studies, and you can see that already we have been able as AidEnvironment to collect nearly 230 case studies at this moment. So they are all here in the platform. And if I show them on the map, you can see that the majority at this moment is still in Latin America, particularly Brazil. We have some cocoa and palm oil cases in West Africa, and still small number of cases now on palm oil or pulp and paper in Indonesia, but this will increase over the coming months. And we also have this idea of expanding those geographies and cases by including cases from other civil society organizations, grassroots organizations. Let me show you how a typical case study looks like, because there can be several definitions of what a case study entails. But basically, our case studies are more like brief case alerts. So we alert potential violations that we have seen. And in the first page of a case study, you can see typically deforestation or fires, before and after clearing images, satellite photos. And then in the second page or third page, is if it's a bit more elaborate, we have a qualitative description of potential social violations that we found. So it could be land grabbing or invasion in indigenous territories, labor issues. So that's all described in the case. And then also you can see here that we have an opportunity for companies to respond to each case, because we do want to fact check with companies that we have the right information. So if companies provided a response, we will always include it in the case. Going back now to the general case study page, we have some interesting filter options. Of course, you can filter on commodities, but I want to highlight this filter for social and environmental violations and risks that typically were found in the case studies. So imagine that you have an interest in, for instance, cattle laundering. You can filter for that, and you will see that there's 8 cases that have mentioned cattle laundering in that qualitative description of the case. Or if you have an interest in human rights violations, labor issues, in Brazil, there's often still slave labor conditions. You can then click on it, and it will show you the 19 cases that all of them mention slave labor conditions or analogous conditions in the case. Other than that, you can also filter on relevant voluntary or legal frameworks. So you can see there's listed many here. So for instance, if I click the one on Brazilian tax laws, there's 5 cases now highlighted that probably have some tax fraud mentioned in the case. So it doesn't mean that it is non-compliant with Brazilian tax laws, because we did not do like a full legal analysis, but it's just flagging that it might be potentially non-compliant under local producer laws or under the EUDR or CSDDD. Then there's a filter for companies. Oh, I still have another filter on. So we have now 43 companies that are at least mentioned one time or more in one of the case studies, and you can then click on it to see all the companies potentially linked. So we have made a classification of how we see potentially probable or confirmed links. And if you are interested in the methodology, I encourage you to check the information icon, because it's exactly explaining what we consider confirmed, probable, or potential. So this is about the case studies. I'm now moving to the EU member states. So in the Compliance Checker platform, we currently focus on all the commodity groups that are in scope of the European Deforestation Regulation, the EUDR. It doesn't mean that there cannot be other commodities, but for this framework now, we have those 7 commodity groups. And for those commodity groups, the 7 you can see that the Netherlands is the biggest importer of all those commodity groups in Europe. So if I click on the Netherlands, there's a lot more information there. So first of all, I want to highlight that we have information available from 2021 till 2025. You can search both for volumes, metric tons, or on values in euros. You can see immediately that soy is a key imported product in the Netherlands. And if you click on it, you can see how Netherlands is positioned towards other EU member states. So for soy imports, you can see that the Netherlands is the second largest importer of soy products in Europe. But unique also to the compliance checker is that we not only look at those 7 commodity groups, but we really highlighted all the commodity products that are in scope now of the Annex 1 of the EUDR. So that have been 77 products that we have analyzed. And this is ranking basically for the Netherlands. We are still in the Netherlands, showing that the key imported product of those 77 products in the Netherlands is soybeans. And you can also see who are the top 5 non-EU producing countries supplying the Netherlands on that commodity product. And then the second one is soy, oil cake, meal, wood pulp. Also interesting to show that we have these deforestation icons. So there's a whole methodology behind it, how we assess that a country might be potentially deforestation risk. So I encourage you to see our methodology where we have explained which countries we assess as deforestation risk. Okay, I'm moving now to the producer countries. So here is the other way around. I just showed that the Netherlands is the biggest EU country importing those 7 commodities under the EUDR, but actually Brazil is the largest supplier of all those forest risk commodities to the European Union. So if you go now to the Brazilian country profile, you can immediately see some highlights. So the top exported product to the European Union is soy, with top destination Spain. But more interestingly, I would say now is again that we have also have this information for all those specific HS codes linked to certain commodity products under the EUDR. So here you see that for Brazil, the largest product that is being imported in the European Union is soy oil cake. And for all of these products, you can see again the top 5 EU destinations. So this data is not new. It's based on Eurostat data, and that is publicly available. But if you download the data, it's pretty raw Excel data sheets, which are quite difficult or challenging sometimes to read. So we have basically analyzed them, regrouped them, and put them in hopefully a better visible format in our compliance checker website. I'm moving now to the companies. I still have 2 sections to go. We have 43 companies currently included in the compliance checker platform that are linked to either 1 or more cases in the platform. And for some of them, we have a more detailed profile, a full profile. And you can see the companies here. And soon there will also be new profiles added, Olam, for instance. But if I click, for instance, on Mondelez, a full profile means that for that company, we have also assessed their deforestation policies. We have found potentially linked case studies. We have mapped their company assets. So in the full company profile, you can read all that information. We have also identified for those companies where are the top sourcing countries of the company with deforestation risk. And then here you can immediately also see the case studies that are potentially linked to Mondelez. Let me check. I realized I wanted to show. Oh no, here. For the companies, I just wanted to state that other than those full profile companies, we also have other companies featured in the case study. It doesn't mean that the supply chain link is 100% sure, but at least they might have a potential link to the case, and you can find all the relevant case studies linked to them. Moving now to the commodity groups. As I already mentioned, we focus on the 7 commodity groups now under the EUDR, and that might also change with the new potential consultation, so we have to see. But we also track other commodities, and we are also intending to increase the track commodities. So if you have an interest, for instance, in corn, you can see here the 10 cases that are linked to corn. Going back. I'm now going to showcase some cattle information. So there's a lot of information here, again, for every year, both in volumes or values. For cattle, you can see that the top non-EU exporter to the European Union is Brazil, and Italy is the key importer of those 11 cattle products. So under the EUDR, currently in Annex 1, there are 11 cattle products. Interesting here is that you can also see it visually. So you can immediately see here on how much every EU country member state imports for that group of cattle products. So you can immediately see that Italy plays a super important role here, as well as the Netherlands. And in this map, the other way around, who are the key origin countries of those cattle products to the EU? So it's mainly Brazil and the UK. This is an overview of those 11 cattle products currently under the EUDR or in scope of the EUDR, and its relative share within the group. So how important is this product within the whole cattle group for being imported in the European Union? And you can immediately see that tanned leather hides are the biggest share product. So for us, it's a bit surprising that leather might be excluded from the EUDR. But because if you see these statistics, I think that would not be a very wise decision. Again, also for the commodities, we have this more detailed breakdown for each of the products. So in this one, you see the top 5 EU importers of all those different cattle products. And you can, of course, I'm saying cattle, but you can replace by all the other commodities that we have. So you can immediately see that for tanned leather hides, Italy is the largest importer. And the other way around, you can here also see the top origins for each of those cattle products. I'm done with the live demo, but I do want to also say a big thanks to the developers of the website that are partly people that have or still work at AidEnvironment. So Sam, Jelle, and Chi, really great job in working on this website. And I hand over back to Lisanne now.
Yes, thank you very much, Sarah, for this. I think it's really impressive to see how the compliance checker can work, what it can look like, and all the different elements of different pieces of data that we can get from it. Yes, and I think it's good that we are very enthusiastic about that, but it's also very important to hear from the external audience, to hear from a third party, to what extent the compliance checker is useful, how it can be useful, how it's relevant, and how they would intend to use it. For that purpose, we invited Sam Lawson, who is the director and founder of Earthsight, to give his perspective on this. So, Sam, please take the floor.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thanks for the invite from AidEnvironment, and congratulations on you guys for all the work that you've put in to what's a very impressive tool. I thought Most of the people on this call probably are reasonably familiar with Earthsight, but I thought I'd give you a little bit of an idea of who we are, just in case you don't know. Next slide, please. So we do investigations. We're a non-profit investigative NGO. We do investigations into forest risk commodities, and that includes all the commodities that are covered by EUDR, and others as well, including, for example, cotton. Our stories have covered a wide range of environmental and human rights abuses in supply chains, so not just deforestation, but also things like corruption, invasion of indigenous lands, abuses of land defenders, including murders and beatings of land defenders. We've also looked at sanctioned paramilitary torturers and forced labor of political prisoners. Our work has also looked at the funding of conflict via purchases of timber from oligarch companies in Russia and Belarus that are closely linked to the regimes in those countries. Next slide, please. Our investigations have exposed a wide array of big companies and brands, and if you click, then it gives you just some idea of some of the logos of some of the brands that we've exposed in the past. Obviously, that includes big furniture companies, it includes supermarkets, it includes fast food companies, automotive companies, clothing companies, DIY retail chains, and so on. And yeah, next slide, please. Our reports, they obtain high-profile press coverage. That example there is of front page of the New York Times from last August, which splashed on a story that we did related to timber from deforestation in Indonesia coming into the US and being used by all of the biggest manufacturers of recreational vehicles in that country. Our investigations do trigger action. We've triggered action in producer countries. So in Ukraine, for instance, there was a big crackdown on illegal logging. The Indonesian government's cancelled permits in relation to our findings in the past. We've also triggered action, voluntary action by companies. So IKEA, for example, the biggest wood purchasing company in the world, they changed their wood purchasing policy in response to our findings on more than one occasion. We've also helped trigger enforcement in the EU. So we've given our information to competent authorities under the existing EU timber regulation, and our evidence has also been used by sanctions authorities for seizures and cases against EU companies. But most importantly, what our evidence is for is showing the urgent need for both better enforcement of existing demand-side laws on forest risk commodities. So that basically means laws related to illegal timber, which exist in the UK, the EU, the US, Australia, and other countries. But it also shows the need for new demand-side laws to cover legal deforestation, not just illegal, and also to cover the other commodities which are impacting forests, not just timber. So obviously that's the soy, the beef, the palm oil, and so on. Next slide, please. So the argument for these demand-side laws has largely been won. The laws, as you will be aware, are on the books already. The EUDR is on the books. In the UK, we have Schedule 17, which is on the books. And there are other relevant legislation awaiting implementation, which is of relevance, like the CSDDD in the EU, which is a broader supply chain ethics legislation. These laws are already having huge impacts, even though they haven't come into full effect yet. And that's a very important thing to bear in mind. But enforcement and implementation is yet to be tested because they haven't actually come into full effect. EUDR has been delayed. Its implementation is currently scheduled for the end of this year. The UK legislation has been delayed while it awaited the government to pass implementing regulations. But they've just in the last couple of days announced that they're getting back on the case with that, which is gratifying to learn. The reason we have reason to be concerned about implementation enforcement is that our experience with timber, illegal timber, both in the UK, in the EU, and in the US, has been that enforcement implementation has been poor. Those report covers there are examples relating to Russia, Ukraine, and Brazil. We've published a number of case studies over the last 10 years showing how EUDR in particular, but also the Lacey Act in the US, have been poorly implemented and enforced. Some of those lessons, also one good thing is that when the EU deforestation regulation was designed, it had a number of provisions which were specifically in there to help address some of the weaknesses with implementation enforcement that was seen with its predecessor, but they only address some of the weaknesses that we know exist and not all of them. So we are still only halfway there. That for these laws to have the impact that we want them to have, and on the climate and for rights and environment in the producer countries, we need to do a better job with enforcement and implementation than we did with the timber regulation. Next slide, please. So just to bear in mind what Earthsight can't do. So each of those reports takes maybe 1 or 2 years. We focus on depth over breadth. We only do a small number of reports, and those reports do not reflect the number of cases that are actually out there. There are thousands of cases of non-compliant goods, of goods of these kinds coming into Europe and elsewhere that have deforestation, illegal deforestation, and rights abuses associated with them. What we do, and what other organizations similar to us do, like Global Witness, Greenpeace, or EIA, is that we choose a select number of cases in order to drive wider change. In Earthsight's case, we tend to look for big household name companies because that gets greater press attention and they're more motivated to act because they have brands to protect. They also are leaders. So we went after IKEA not because they were the worst, but because they were the biggest. We also look for the most egregious cases in terms of deforestation and rights abuses, and we also look for cases which speak to key systemic issues which are undermining enforcement or need to be addressed, like, for example, exposing the failure of voluntary certification schemes to address the concerns that the EUDR sets out to address. So even when we publish a case, we often won't name every single company in our report because we don't want to sort of water down our message. So example, we published a report about cotton clothing relating to deforestation and land grabbing in Brazil. And we focused that report on 2 companies, H&M and Zara, but we also had links to many other big clothing brands, but we chose not to focus on all of them because that would have undermined our broader message. Next slide, please. So what's this got to do with the compliance checker and why is it so important? Well, we see the compliance checker as being essential and a unique thing which was missing from the EU timber regulation. What you basically have is you have 4 groups of organizations doing different things, at least you do now, that AidEnvironment's doing this. So the first one, the biggest group of organizations, are the ones that are confirming compliance. So this is the traditional certification bodies for the different commodities like FSC for timber and RSPO for palm oil, but you also have producer government-led certification schemes, like you have SVLK in Indonesia and you have Surflaw in Brazil. And you also have now a plethora of private sector entities offering services to companies to provide compliance checking for their goods. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to confirm that a particular case is compliant. On the other end of the spectrum, you have organizations like ours. What we do is we expose specific big non-compliance cases with systemic implications. That means we're looking, as I said, at a relatively small number of cases, and our evidence is spread out amongst the different websites for the different organizations concerned, and it's not all housed in one easy place where you can see it. The third kind of organization that you have in this space, they analyze general risk patterns. So the classic example that you're probably familiar with is the TRACE project run by Global Canopy and SEI. But what they're doing is is a different thing. What they're doing is that they're using assumptions and applying general risk profiles to supply chains, providing sort of probabilistic evidence. In the same sort of group, I would say you also have academic studies and you have think tanks like Forest Trends who provide similar information, but this isn't specific enough for it's not specific at the same level as what the compliance checker includes. So what the compliance checker is doing, and is completely unique, is, in fact, in a way, compliance checker is kind of like a misnomer in my mind for what the compliance checker is. I'd call it a non-compliance database in a sense. What it's doing is it's exposing non-compliance cases at scale. It's doing it in a systemic and professional fashion with proper procedures for evidence checking and for giving companies opportunities to respond. And it's putting all that evidence in one place. And that is essential going forward for compliance. It's essential as a tool for the competent authorities in the member states, and not only the member states, but also in the UK and the US and other countries that have relevant legislation in place. These case studies are also of interest to those people. Also, it's crucial for the companies. So if you're a company that's importing these goods come January next year, when the EUDR comes into full effect, you're required to do due diligence. You're required to minimize the risk of what you're importing is non-compliant with the law to a negligible level. And it seems to me that if you're such a company and you haven't checked the information in the compliance checker, then you haven't done your due diligence and you're not compliant with the law. So it's absolutely crucial as a source of information, and I'm very glad it exists and very glad to support it. And yeah, that's everything I had to say. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Sam, for that. That's a really interesting presentation, sharing about the work that Earthsight has done in this space, the impact of it, but also how the compliance checker is basically adding on to that, or has the potential to add on to that by filling a space that is currently not yet occupied. So thank you so much for that. It's really appreciated. Thank you also very much to Sarah. I think it's really great to have two of these expert speakers present the compliance checker in full, taking two different perspectives. First of all, I think it's now time to share with all of you that by now the compliance checker has officially been launched, and that means that we are also officially able to share with you the link to the platform. I believe the link will be shared with you in the chat, so you can already have a look at it, roam through it, check it out. Yes, your feedback is always welcome, and yes, we're very happy to share with you. At the same time, it's also time for us to move to the last part of this webinar, and that's the Q&A section. So I believe a Q&A function has been opened through which you can submit your questions. Please do so. If you have a question that is specifically targeted at Sarah or at Sam, please indicate. And if it's a general question, also very welcome. We will try to address as many as possible in the small time frame we have available. So please move forward with the questions. For now, I think looking at the first question that we can get started with, this is a question that is specifically aimed at Sarah. Sarah, the question: how are the compliance checker cases being used and picked up by organizations, and how do companies respond to these cases?
Thank you. So far, I would say that the majority of cases are mostly being used by advocacy organizations. So think of the Mighty Earth, DOH, Rainforest Foundation Norway, and they use it for their campaigns on specific companies, for instance. But they are also being used by legal organizations. So, for instance, Client Earth, Glenn, and they use it to prepare legal cases or to prepare substantiated concerns. But we also collaborate a lot with investigative journalists and media. Particularly our cattle data is widely being used because we have one of the largest data sets on direct and indirect suppliers of cattle to the 3 largest meat packers in Brazil. So that data has been used in the last years for media articles in The Guardian or the Washington Post. Also, it has impact through grassroots organizations or local organizations. For instance, in Brazil, we have been informed that some of the cases have been used in local courts to basically to influence court decision. And we know in some cases it has been used to withdraw environmental license for clearing. And companies, that was a specific question as well. So companies use the cases so far mostly as grievance cases. And it really depends on the type of company, also how the engagement is. So AidEnvironment, we are not a campaigning organization, but we are more like a data provider. But at the same time, we do direct engagement with companies on the cases. And that's mostly as a fact check to make sure we don't put any non-factual information in there. And some companies are much more responsive and transparent than other companies. So, for instance, we are going to upload next week in the compliance checker 9 new cocoa cases in Brazil. And we have shared that with the largest cocoa traders in Brazil, and we have seen so much difference in responses. So, for instance, Barrica Lebut has been the most transparent. They have said or stated that based on the findings, they have suspended or paused sourcing from some of at least 3 of the cases of that report, while other traders were less transparent, I would say. So it also really depends on the companies, I would say, and how they use the cases, if they really want to use it for improving their due diligence systems. And that's what we hope, at least. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. I think it's a very interesting question and a good answer as well. Good to hear about very direct examples as well of how the compliance checker cases have already been able to impact. Another question that came in, it says, we know that there's a lot of noise and wrong information, not saying what is legal versus illegal deforestation. So how are you checking the information shared in the checker? I think this is also a question for Sarah.
I saw that question indeed. So I think it's, first of all, good to highlight that we always work with local partners. So, for instance, in Brazil, we work, among others, with Reporter Brazil, Agribusiness Watch. So they validate basically the case. So we start preparing a draft case, and they validate the findings. But also for some countries, we have ourselves built like a super giant GIS system, so geographic information system, and we have overlaid many data sources. So we have rural cadastre data, we have, of course, deforestation data, we have data on the type of vegetation. We check national deforestation data, but also more recent alerts, and we visually confirm all alerts. Of course, the cases would benefit from having even field investigations, so that would require much higher form of resources, as also Sam has already presented. Like, if you really want to deep dive in a case, that can take 1 or 2 years, and then of course you can do field checks. And I can also tell you that already in a new project for some of the cases, we are going to include field work with local partners in Brazil and Indonesia. And finally, I want to highlight again that we also do this validation or check with the companies. So if they say that something is wrong in the cases, we also include that in the case study itself. And then sometimes we give also a response back to that. So then I would say the reader can decide what is factual information and what not. So let me stop there and give a question to Sam as well.
Yes, thank you very much. And indeed, I think we also have some questions coming in, and this one would be very interesting to hear Sam's perspective on. Sam, the question to you. How do you see a case study evidence being used beyond individual due diligence? So, for example, in policy discussions or sector-wide accountability efforts? especially as new legislation of this type emerges?
Yeah, I think each individual case study always speaks to general points. So if you're seeing, for example, I mean, one of the things that the compliance checker is doing is it's looking at some commodities which aren't covered by the EUDR. So, for example, if there's a lot of cases coming in, then that might speak to the revisions of EUDR, which are scheduled for a few years' time, where they're going to consider what other commodities to include, for example. Another thing that what we tend to try and focus on is yes, systemic risk. So what you start seeing is that you might start seeing more cases, unaddressed cases relating to specific member states, for example, suggesting that there are countries within Europe that need to be doing more enforcement. You might see a lot of cases where there is non-compliance, but the supposed compliance has been shown by a particular certification scheme or private sector outfit, where they're trying to sort of, and that would show a systemic problem with that service provider, that they are claiming to be able to prove compliance, but actually the non-compliance cases that AidEnvironment is collecting were able to show that that's not the case. I mean, more broadly, we'd hope to see that the number of non-compliances go down once these laws come into effect, because it should get harder and harder to see non-compliance cases, because the laws should be being implemented. So that will be something that this kind of data on a kind of broader level can help us monitor. So yeah, huge range of such things.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Sam. Very clear. For the next one of the questions that comes in, I think, well, let's keep an open question. Maybe Sarah can go first, and after that we can see Sam can come second if he wants. How do you see the compliance checker evolve as the EUDR implementation progresses and new legislation of this type emerges?
Yes. So first of all, I really want to highlight and flag that we hope the compliance checker will not be like a ticking box exercise, and you can have like labels like compliant or non-compliance. The strength of the platform is that it's based on investigative research, deforestation monitoring, supply chain analysis. So we really hope it can help also users to ask the right questions, and also to provide credible warning signs. Secondly, once the EUDR implementation begins, so that will be from January 2027, we see it will probably become even more important. So yeah, once it becomes live, the key question will be whether existing due diligence systems, for instance, from companies, are they really finding the real risk? So I hope people can then use also the platform to see if the real risks are also uncovered in the existing due diligence systems. We also hope to support and help competent authorities to prioritize the questions that they can ask, and to identify the relevant commodities, regions, the operators, and so to support that they can check what is most needed, because they often also have capacity issues. So yeah, in that sense, it can help for that. And finally, I would like to highlight that the compliance checker is very flexible in itself. We have experience in covering certain topics or themes. So imagine that we want to focus a bit more on really illegal deforestation in the Amazon. We can focus on that. So it has a lot of flexibility also in finding in patterns that we see. For instance, there's indirect supply chain risk. What are the key commodities that should be covered under the EUDR? So it's not only those cases and not only checking compliance for companies, it's really broader, also finding these trends and also linking to much more regulations than only the EUDR. And I want to ask Sam if he can follow up on that, because yeah, you're based in UK and there's other laws as well than only the the EUDR?
Yeah, I think it'll be up to AidEnvironment how it evolves, but and it will be up to the funders. I mean, like I would certainly put out an appeal to any funders out there to support its growth and development, because I think, I mean, one of the key things that we'd like, as Earthsight would like to see, would be for it to expand to include more case studies from third parties being produced by Global South partners. That costs money though, because you have to do careful verification of those findings. We know very well, how carefully you need to double check things. So we would like to see it expand and include information from third parties. And yes, I think it will have to evolve as the legislation evolves. We're seeing a gradually expanding legislation. The UK regulations are now look like they're going to come in finally, and there might be some changes to what the UK law even says in the pipeline. So and EUDR itself will evolve. It potentially could cover new commodities in the future, as I mentioned in my previous intervention. You have in the US legislation that has been tabled in the past. It's not about to progress during the current administration, but that could change in a year or two's time. You also have legislation in other environments, and you have national legislation related to ethical supply chains, which also is relevant to this. I mentioned the EU CSDDD, which is broader ethical supply chain legislation. There is similar legislation under development potentially in the UK, and there's already such legislation already in place in Germany, for example. So the legislative environment is growing. And potentially, it could also extend beyond the agricultural commodities. It could look at, for instance, minerals. So gold and nickel and other minerals, where there is also legislation in place and legislation under development, from which this could be a beneficial source.
Thank you very much, Sam. I think this is a very interesting answer, and it's also leading us up to the very last question. Sam was highlighting all the different areas of expansion and add-on, how additional impact could be reached. The final question that we're able to address today is, what is your biggest priority for the checker in the next 6 to 12 months, and what is the main thing slowing you down? I think, Sarah, this one would be good if you could answer.
Yes. So in the next 6 to 12 months, we are focusing mostly on cattle and soy sectors, and palm oil, pulp and paper sectors, and some cocoa in West Africa. But yeah, basically what is slowing us down is, we need access to public databases. We are in need of transparency by companies. So often we need to work with proxies, and it would be much more helpful if we can have better data understanding the supply chain. We also could benefit a lot from the more expensive data sets. So we have nice planet satellite imagery, but I know there are much more private companies that might have even much better satellite data with higher resolution. But yeah, all of these are very expensive. So in that sense, it's super essential that we get funding from the funders like European Climate Foundation and Nick Finorot to be able to cover for that. And as Sam said, I really want to also emphasize that for sure we have now a priority in the next couple of months, even to start integrating cases from either investigative organizations such as Earthsight or environmental investigative agency, but also from grassroots organizations. So we will definitely aim for an expansion of our geographies and commodities, so also including minerals, DRC, so that the whole compliance checker is much more broadly relevant for everyone to use.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Sarah and Sam, for the very interesting answers to the questions. I think it's I think there are more questions even coming in, but for sake of time, I think this is where we have to leave it for now. I think it's super interesting how you put the compliance checker, placed in a larger landscape, but also how it relates to other efforts, how it links to legislation efforts, new legislation efforts. But also, even though it's already having such a good added value based on what's already there, there's also still room for expansion, for further development, as you mentioned, across new legislations, geographies, commodities, better data. And so I think it's also a tool that we keep improving even further and further. And for that, I think everyone in this school is also invited to contribute, because of course that takes not only effort, but it takes a lot more than that. Thank you all so much today already for supporting, for moving together. I see that there's already a QR code on screen. Rita, can you please pick it up from here?
Yes, just want to thank you all for having been here with us today on this launch. And in particular, thank you to our moderator, Lizana, and to our speakers, Sarah and Sam. I think this has been a good roundup conversation and the kind of exchange that we hope this launch would generate. Before we close completely, a few things for everyone to keep in mind. So as you've already been made aware of, the compliance checker is now live and publicly accessible. So the link has been shared with you in the chat, and we do encourage you to explore it and to share it with colleagues or any networks for which you think it may be useful. Again, the recording of today's session will be sent to all registrants by email, so you can also revisit any part of today's presentations and conversation. If you have any follow-up questions, or there are any pressing questions we did not have time to address during the Q&A, or not in full as you have wished, you're welcome to reach out to us directly via the compliance checker email address, which has also been shared in the chat. We've also shared there how to sign up to our compliance checker mailing list. So if you wish to, then you can receive news directly about any developments on the platform. And if you would like to stay up to date with our work, please follow AidEnvironment on LinkedIn. We'll be sharing updates, news, insights, linked to our work in general, but also to the compliance checker in particular. So that's all from us today. I want to thank you again for your time and your interest, and we hope you keep visiting us at compliancechecker.org. Take care, everyone.